Our meeting procedures tonight are different than when we're on Teams because we're not on Teams. So for advisory group members to weigh in, just raise your hand, wait to be called on, and that'll keep things orderly, and so that we can make sure that we're getting to everybody and not having one person dominate the conversation. And for members of the public, your comment will be taken at the end of the meeting, 2 or 3 minutes, depending on how much time we manage to leave and how many of you would like to talk. And just one more time, in case you didn't hear Kristen a couple of minutes ago, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the advisory group page. So know that you're being recorded. We can do a group selfie at the end. Let's jump into introductions, especially since we're seeing each other in person for the first time. So again, I'm Chris Slatt. I'm the chair of the working group, former chair of the Transportation Commission, but that feels like long ago now. Do we have anybody from Arlington Neighborhoods Advisory Committee? I don't see Bill tonight. Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Mike Hannon.
Excellent. C2E2?
John McIntyre.
Commission on Aging. Hi, Catalina. Disability Advisory Committee. Hello, Elizabeth. I think we don't have anybody from Economic Development tonight. There's Bill. Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission, anyone? Not tonight. All right. Forestry and Natural Resources.
Harry.
Neighborhood Complete Streets.
Aaron Foots.
Good to see you, Aaron. I believe we have nobody from Parks and Rec tonight. Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Good to see you, Pam. Planning Commission.
Tony Steiner.
Awesome to see you, Tony. Transit Advisory Committee.
That's me. Hello, everyone.
Good to see you. And 2 reps from Transportation Commission who are not our normal reps from Transportation Commission.
Hello.
Alex Middleton.
All right, and then late arrival from Arlington Neighborhoods Advisory Committee. Say hi, Bill.
And then I'll introduce myself. I'm Kristen Culkins. I'm the project manager at the county for Arlington's Transportation Future, and I am supported here by a phenomenal team. This does not happen by myself. I'm going to have my deputy project manager, our planning program manager, our 3 Cape team officials, and our consultants introduce themselves. And with that, Chris can sit down if he wants, or he can stand and pace. It's entirely up to him. But we appreciate you all coming in person tonight. We know that these virtual meetings are a lot easier and more convenient for all of us, staff included, but we thought this was a really important one to do in person because we're going to start talking about what the priority modal networks are, and that's a conversation that just is better done in person. So tonight we're going to kind of share with you what we're defining modal priority as and what it means for decision making for Arlington's transportation future, why we're doing a modal priority network, and how we think it's going to help us deliver a transportation network that serves our community's needs and meets the vision and goals laid out by the board. And then we're also going to share how we are approaching, how we developed a preliminary draft network. So what is modal priority? For Arlington's transportation future, modal priority means that it's the mode we design for on a specific street. It means that when we go and do a corridor study, we are designing for bikes or transit to have safe, comfortable, and efficient travel along that corridor. A modal priority for a specific corridor does not mean that other modes can't take advantage of that corridor. You can still bike there, you can still drive there, a bus could still run down it. It just means it's not the mode that we are prioritizing when we make decisions about how we allocate space in the right of way. Modal priorities will help us make those hard decisions when we don't have enough space to do it all. We've all traveled through this county so many times that we know that you can't do everything on every single street. So having a priority will help us understand what we do well in any given location to make sure networks work as a whole. So this kind of doubles down again. We're going to be repeating this a few times just because we know it's kind of new for Arlington. But a modal priority network is a collection of streets that prioritizes the movement of a specific mode. It recognizes that we're not going to be able to do everything on every single street. We're not going to have safe and comfortable bike facilities on every street in the county. We're not going to be able to have buses comfortably run on every single street in the county. But what we do need are networks that connect to key destinations that provide connectivity to other modes so that we have these networks that people can move around in the county. One of the things that we like to emphasize, and we're going to talk about a lot with priority networks, is they're not facility type specific. A transit priority does not mean bus lanes. A bike priority does not mean a cycle track. Bus priority can mean a lot of different things. It can be bus bulb outs, it can be signal priority, it can be bat turns, which are right turn lanes where buses kind of like flow by, or it could mean a bus lane. For bicycle priority, if it's a local street, it could be the bike boulevard treatments that we see on some of our bigger corridors. It could be cycle tracks. It can also be parallel trails along some of our roadways. This is not prescriptive of what we will design. It's telling us where we need to accommodate modes safely. And as we do corridor studies in the future, we'll figure out what that looks like from a context sensitive perspective. Not everything makes sense everywhere. It will help us understand that when we do these studies, how we use our limited space and what we do with it. And it will be the lens through how a lot of the policies that we create in the plan are applied. A lot of these policies will be implemented through corridor studies, and the corridor studies are going to let us know what mode we're prioritizing. These networks are going to help us understand and be built off of the current and anticipated transportation demands of the county. They're going to help people move safely, reliably, efficiently, and comfortable around the county. And they're going to make sure people can get to their daily destinations, not just work, but recreation, social needs, community needs. They are going to be that backbone of mobility. One of the things that we want to reflect on is, what does modal priority mean in comparison to how we currently plan? So right now, the transportation plan map is a recommendation of specific facilities. It has roadway classifications. It identifies where specific types of improvements are needed for the bicycle network, for pedestrians, for transit facilities. It says, build a bike lane here. Build a new metro elevator here, rather than prioritize the movement of bikes through this corridor. Sometimes that's very difficult for us because we can't say exactly how much space we have to do something at a master long-range transportation plan level. Being so specific on a corridor is hard and does not allow us to always plan effectively. So the current transportation plan has 4 networks that are planned for out of the 6 elements that exist. We have the bicycle network that's recommended in the MTP. We have pedestrian networks, especially emphasized by our pedestrian priority zones. We have the street network as reflected in the street networks map and the roadway classification types. And then we have a transit network that recommends premium, primary, and secondary transit networks. So how does this modal priority kind of compare to the more facility-based map that we currently have? When we transition to modal priority, it's going to help us understand how we use that limited right-of-way in the future, but it's not going to be so explicit that we have to decide today exactly how we design a corridor. We can't do that for every single corridor in the county through this process and do it well. We need that detailed process to make sure that we are allocating space appropriately and effectively to the priority mode in the future. It's going to tell us where we need to focus investments because we've said this is a priority corridor for this mode. It will help us kind of compare our needs throughout the county. It's a planning style that a lot of jurisdictions have been transitioning to, as a lot of our peers have found challenges with the hyper-specific recommendations in their plans as they go to implement. One of the things that we're going to do is use this map to tell us how and where we should be prioritizing our work. It's going to let us know where we should be planning and emphasizing our bike needs, where our transit needs are as a county. For the community, including you, it's going to be kind of your understanding of what we've prioritized. It's your ability to advocate for the commitments the county has made. And for the county board, commissions, and committees, it is their understanding of what we are working towards as a county as they create budgets, review site plans, and approve projects. So we kind of take a step back anytime we start a new phase of this planning process and think about the great information we heard from the community in phase one. We heard that people walk. It's the most common form of transportation people use today and a way they want to continue to walk in the future. Transit is what people said they want to see most invested in, and it's how they want to travel more often in the future. We know that pedestrians and bicyclists are our most vulnerable roadway users, and that walking is an all ages form of transportation that has low transportation costs and is the most accessible form of transportation to people of all ages. Because of this, we are going to make pedestrians our global priority within the county. I knew I was going to get a thumbs up from Pam on that one. Every single corridor, when we look at it, when we think about it, when we design for it, our first question is going to be, are pedestrians safely and comfortably accommodated on this corridor? And then we're going to create modal priority networks for both transit and bicycle and micromobility, because those networks are not complete yet. We have complete vehicular networks in the county. People can drive pretty much wherever they want to go within the county, but our transit network does not do that yet, and neither does our bike network. So we need priority networks to help us understand where we need to make investments to create a complete network for people who want to move around the county. So this is it. I've just questions at the end, unless it's a clarification on the slide. Apologies. So this kind of pyramid helps you understand how those priorities work. Pedestrians are always the first thing we think about in a corridor study when we're designing an intersection. And then we're going to create priority networks for buses, for transit, and then for our bike and micromobility, because we need to create complete networks for those. We're going to create hierarchies too. There are going to be some places where we might have a second priority for transit, a third priority for bus, vice versa, or other corridors might just only have one second priority because we recognize the fact that there's limited right-of-way and we can't do it all, or it's not somewhere a bus is running, or there's a great bike facility within, a quarter mile, so we don't need to accommodate bicycling on that corridor. Again, emphasizing all of these networks continue to assume vehicular access. We have a complete vehicular network. We're not saying you can't drive there. We're just saying that when we do these corridor studies, we're not thinking about how we make driving easier. We're thinking about how we prioritize pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit along these corridors. So again, transit priority informs where we are making transit investments. It's not specific to the type of investment being made, but what we consider. Same for bicycle and micromobility. It's not prescriptive of the specific type of bicycle facility that we would build. That would all be figured out through an alternatives analysis. George Mason is kind of a recent example of how we think we will work through those type of decisions. So kind of our catchphrase through this whole process is modal priority is not prescriptive of a treatment or facility type. We also kind of want to answer a question that we get asked a lot is, well, what about curbside uses? What about street trees and biophilia? We know those are very important to our networks, to our community, but they're not modes. So we're not creating modal priorities for those. Those will have policies that articulate how and where we work and plan for them within the right of way. So in summary, pedestrian priority, top of the pyramid. We want to make sure that pedestrians are comfortable and have safe accommodations throughout the county. We will identify the modes that are the priority on different corridors in the county. We're going to walk through that in a minute for both transit and bicycle and micromobility. So we are at the beginning of this process. We've created a little bit of a understanding of how we work through this process. And what we started with are our current plans. We've done a lot of planning as a community over the last 20 years about where we want transit, where we want bicycle access, where pedestrians exist, which is hopefully everywhere. But right now, a lot of those networks, because of our siloed process, have conflicts. We have recommendations on a number of our corridors that when we look and really think about, can we provide reliable transit service on this and an all ages bicycle facility, we can't. The map isn't an achievable recommendation. So what we're trying to do is deconflict those recommendations, understand where we really do need to make sure the bus works, and that's going to be our top priority. Understand where we really need bicycle connectivity, where there's overlaps today, and say, okay, well, maybe we're going to have to figure out transit somewhere else. It's not losing a recommendation from our perspective, because the next step is a gap analysis. This is us being honest about what we can do with our right-of-way. There are just streets where we cannot have everything work well. We need to think about how we create a network rather than plan for everything on every corridor. So the gap analysis hasn't happened yet. So I'm just going to say, when we pull out these maps, they are not complete. They do not represent what we think is necessary for transit, for bicycle and micromobility to complete full networks for people who will rely on them in the future. They are just our process of deconflicting existing recommendations. How we identify the current planned corridors kind of built off of a lot of the things that you already know exist. For transit, it's the current MTP map and our transit element. It's the ART and Metrobus routes that run today. It's recommendations within the transit strategic plan, the Metro's Better Bus Visionary Transit Network, and the BRT recommendations and the Northern Virginia Transit Commission, which room we're in, and the Northern Virginia Transit Authority's regional bus priority maps or BRT maps. And then for bicycle and micromobility, we're looking at the current MTP element and the bicycle element. We're looking at what we have on the ground today and kind of what's planned out there, as well as what are our neighboring jurisdictions doing? Where do they plan to have bike connectivity that we should be thinking about connecting to? So bear with me, because we created a flowchart to help us walk through this process. So the first question, as we think about the corridors where, based off of our two networks, our bicycle and micromobility networks and our transit networks, we say you should do both. And our first question is, well, are both recommended? And if the answer is no, the question is, okay, well, which one is? And if it's transit, then it's a ped and transit priority corridor. And if it's bike, then it's ped and bike. That's a very easy part of this flowchart. And this is like the sixth iteration of how we tried to articulate how we did this. So that the second question goes into, okay, well, we have transit and bikes recommended on this corridor. There's two questions we can ask, or a question we can ask with two more decision points. Do we think that the ped facilities on this corridor are appropriate? Are they adequate? Or do we think if we were going to come in and do a corridor redesign in the future, that we're going to need space to make those sidewalks more comfortable? And if the answer is no, the sidewalks are great. They've already got like 8 feet and, buffered from the travel lanes. They've got planted trees. Okay, that's great. So the question we ask, is this corridor a low or high frequency transit route? Not a strict definition, but if the bus comes every 30 minutes, we're considering that low. If it comes more frequently than that, we're considering it a higher frequency transit corridor. So if it's a low frequency transit corridor, that means our priority is ped, bike, transit, recognizing that those travel lanes need to be adequate enough for buses to safely and comfortably travel along the corridor still, but we may not be doing the same level of treatments as we will for the bike. If it's a high transit corridor, though, one that is like a backbone of our transit network, and one of the things that we recognize within the county is our transportation network does not work without a robust transit network. I love walking, I love biking, but if our transit network does not move people in Arlington County, walking and biking will just become untenable, because it means everybody's driving. So we're recognizing that importance that transit has, that if it's a high transit corridor, high frequency, it means it's moving a lot of people. We need to make sure that that bus continues to work on that corridor, so people continue to take or start to take transit, so that we can have this network that works for everything. So in those situations where we have an overlap and there's space on the sidewalk, where we have transit and bike recommended with enough space already for sidewalks, the priority will be ped, transit, bike. The hardest conversation, and where you will see a lot of changes happening on the maps we'll be pulling out, is where we recognize we don't have adequate space right now for pedestrians. I'm going to throw out a couple of corridors you'll see on these maps. Corridors like Wilson Boulevard from Glebe to the Bluemont Trail. Washington Boulevard from Glebe to Kirkwood. Glebe and many parts of the county, we don't have comfortable sidewalks. They aren't wide enough. They have impediments in them. We know that if and when we do an improvement to those corridors, we need space for the sidewalks. And if we're doing that, we probably won't be able to do both bike and transit well on that corridor. So we asked ourselves that same question. Okay, well, what does the transit look like on this corridor? If it's a low frequency transit route, much more comes every 30 minutes, it's providing kind of access, but it's not really moving people. We're going to make that a ped and bike priority. It doesn't mean buses still won't run on those routes at times. It just means when we're prioritizing the right of way, it's not to move the buses, it's to move people walking and people riding a bike or scooter or whatever the next micromobility treatment comes out to be. That's our priority. But if we ask that question and we say, this is a high frequency transit route, this is a backbone of our network. People take this transit route. It needs to run. It needs to be reliable. People need to move across the county on this transit route. We're saying ped and transit. We are going to look for gaps. We're going to do our gap analysis because there are going to be some places where you saw bikes recommended on the bike map in the MTP, where we're being honest with ourselves and saying we cannot do it all. We cannot create safe and comfortable pedestrian facilities. We cannot move transit and people in the way we want to create a high capacity, reliable transit network for this county and make biking comfortable on this corridor. We just can't do it all. Let's be honest with ourselves and let's work through that hard conversation by looking for where we can address that through a gap analysis. So when you see these maps, we haven't done the gap analysis. It's not there. So you're going to see missing pieces of this network, and we know that. You're going to be part of the process. The community is going to be part of the process to make sure that these networks are complete and whole. We've done a conversation about that deconflicting so we can really see where those gaps are. So we know what we need to be planning for where, so that in 30 years, we have a complete network and we still don't have lines on the map that we know we can't implement. So I'm going to pause for a minute. I know I just threw a lot at you, but we have a couple of high-level questions that we think will help you work through this process. You can ask other ones. But did the criteria we just laid out about how we deconflicted the priorities make sense? Is that line clear to you? Does it make sense how we're trying to work and reconcile these priority networks? And from a process perspective, we'll get to the maps, but from a process perspective, do you have questions?
Chart of how we're prioritizing that transit versus bike. I think that's right. Everything everywhere. My only question right now is where in the part where you determine the priority based on transit frequency, whether it's high or low. What about in cases where, let's say, it is a low frequency transit corridor, but maybe in future the community or else, the community would like to see it become a high frequency transit corridor. How does that factor into what the priority becomes?
So we did look at some of the more ambitious networks that are out there. So the NVTA BRT routes, the NVDC and Vision Route 7. And we looked at our transit strategic plan as well, which is kind of our understanding of what will be there. And at a certain point, we have to just make a decision about what we prioritize where. We had a lot of those conversations. And that's why we are emphasizing too that it doesn't mean that modes won't be able to use these facilities. It just means that right now, in the next 10 years, if we're doing a corridor study, that's probably not the mode that we'll be designing for and making the most important mode. Someone's going to do this plan again in 15 to 20 years, and those demographics may change, and there may be different transit routes that need priority.
Actually, I think I like that too, because then it also has that there's an immediacy where it's like, okay, maybe we want it to be high frequency. Right now it isn't, and so there needs to be something needs to change. We have to, yes. So I like that. Nice.
Are you calling on people or am I?
Unless I'll speak up because it's a big room and we want to make sure the recording picks everybody up too. Joan, go ahead.
What is the assumptions about cars? It would seem that you're assuming that the vehicle traffic is what it is today. And, what are the trade-offs in terms of, how much space you allow for the vehicle traffic
So-
outside of these corridors?
So this is not a plan that is designing the X, Y, and Z's of space. It's recommending priority. So we're not creating a vehicular priority. We're just saying they can continue to use these streets. So as far as the assumptions of vehicular travel and where they go, it's assumed that vehicles can continue to use the streets. We'll be creating policies about what we want transportation to look like in the future that will be kind of a sister piece of our plan to these modal networks.
So Kristen, does that mean decisions about, like, for instance, when a corridor study happens on Fairfax Drive,
Mhm.
whether 4 lanes are still needed for car travel, that gets made at that corridor study?
Yes.
I'm not in this. plan.
Right. It's part of the alternatives analysis that would be done. And with the understanding that people walking, people either biking or taking transit, you'll see CMF soon based on our recommendations, need to be accommodated safely, comfortably well. And then the rest of that space is vehicular space. One of the things that we think is very important about this is it's saying that these are our priorities. We don't have that line in the sand right now. We have facility recommendations. We have a lot of different pieces out there that aren't policy driven together. They're modally specific policies that don't talk to each other. So in that future, when we do these corridor studies, we're going to have policies about what we prioritize and why within the right of way that are sister pieces of policy to our priority. It will all eventually come together.
Like,
Yeah, I think it's related to that, so. In this, or is that part of,
It's an overlay.
it's an overlay, so we really don't really know how much room we have on the street to deal, whether there's room really for stuff. Whether we're gonna have the parking in that or not.
So what we're planning on doing for parking is we are going to be creating a decision matrix of sorts that speaks about what types of use of the curb space are important where and why. And it is not explicit to parking. We're taking away the assumption that curb space in the county is for parking and parking alone. We are going to, not done yet, but our plan is to create and talk through the importance of the curb, and then it's a dynamic piece of our public right of way that just isn't about vehicular storage, but it's about pickup drop off, it's economic, it's transportation space. It has so many things that need to use that space that we're going to create a decision matrix that in parallel with these corridor priorities will help us understand when we do these alternatives analysis in the future and we go down a corridor and we say, hey, there's parking on both sides of the street, but like we can't safely accommodate bikes. We've set our priority as bikes. And that will help in that alternatives analysis, us make decisions about how we use the right of way.
Can't remember your name, but you. Sorry. That's an RC.
Assumption that vehicles will continue to use the streets preclude consideration of very innovative solutions that other cities have found very successful, with just closing off streets.
So that's a policy consideration that we would do through the policy development of the plan. This plan is just saying, we're not saying vehicles can't use these streets. We're just saying they are not the design mode or the primary mode that we want to be considered when we reinvest in these streets in the future.
Pre-closing could be considered somewhere.
It could be a policy about filter. There could be lots of, we have not baked our policy. There's going to be engagement on policy too. So it's also going to depend upon what we find from a professional perspective makes sense and what we hear from our community members, from the advisory group, through engagement about what priorities we have for our policies in the plan.
Now, I kind of asked a similar question at the very first meeting on this topic, kind of getting to Sohail's point. Is there a way that you can update these priorities sort of on an individual basis? Because I like this framework, because it's very flexible. And I get my question, is there a way to update individual corridors, and their priorities, like, so I was saying, if the use of these streets change over the next 15 years, is there a way to do it in this time?
So one of the things we'll think about with this plan is what our review process looks like for the plan. What I would say is I don't think we'd want to update in any individual corridor by itself, because the whole point of these are networks. And if we change one corridor without thinking about the implications that may have on a network, we don't want to do that. But I do think that there's going to be a little bit more of a check-in on this plan than maybe we've had with the way the previous plan was checked in on. Mm-hmm.
This would be a situation where right now, we just kind of ad hoc updating that as needed, whereas what we're expecting is every milestone for years.
Yeah.
That you revisit.
I think it's pretty, yeah.
I was gonna say a lot of what Allison said, is like with our current MTP, we've certainly updated it in response to other plans and planning that we have done. You know, when we did Roslyn, we were like, okay, this has implications for our current, planned street network. And then those changes were adopted right after Roslyn's sector plan was adopted as part of the implementation. Aaron.
First, I appreciate hearing that cars being parked is not a mode. Thank you. But I guess people are banging on this idea. I'm about inducing a mode. Love to see bicycle micromobility grow like. But all we're doing, how we've done the last 20 years, is nibble. Does this allow us to be bold and make safe bike lanes that go somewhere for a long time? I live by a really nice 2-block section of protected bike lane that comes from nowhere and goes to nowhere. But it's just not convenient to do more than that. So is this going to be bold enough to help change things?
So I may pull on Brian for this answer, but our intent is to create networks that we think can happen. And I think one of the challenges with the current MTP map is that it was ambitious, but it was not realistic. Like there were just corridors that we can't do in a way that were recommended. And what we want to do with this network is create a recommendation that we look at and say, this is something we can work towards. This is something we can push. And Brian, one of the things that you've been considering with the network is mesh density. Do you want to speak to that for a second?
Yeah. It's from where these need to go in a more direct fashion.
I will just say these maps that you're going to see is not going to be reflective of that.
Just it actually probably relates to that question is, what are the big metrics that we're looking at? Things like, at a big level is anybody can get anywhere they want on a bike without, in a protected bike lane, without having to go completely out of their way or having to go through parts that they have no protection. I mean,
So
it's that type of vision that we've set on. So how does that actually, and it's the metrics that are going to help decide whether we're getting there.
So we are not there in the planning process yet as far as metrics go. What I will say is take the type of facility out of your mind, because a lot of what these comfortable networks are going to look like, and I may tap Brian in just one more time, we're looking at a lot of our neighborhood streets and places where we can do bike boulevard style treatments. Those are comfortable already. And if we make them a little bit more comfortable, can serve as the kind of the connective tissue of the network. We are going to make sure that everything kind of connects to our trail network that is really like the lifeblood of the bike network within the county. Not every route may be the most direct route, because we may not just be able to create a comfortable facility on the most direct route. we want a comfortable route first, and then we want to make them as direct as we can. And Brian, did I say anything incorrectly, or is there something we should add? Okay. Mhm.
For example, on like the public like right boulevard, it makes recommendations through the existing properties. That assume development or assume maybe the county requires that property and you don't trail connection. So those plan pieces aren't on the maps you're going to see tonight. We're only looking at the existing street network. But those are things that should be in the back of your mind as we think about how we can build maps. We're not limited to just the existing street network. We could look at places where, say, you could get a mostly direct bike route, but it has to be only 3 left turns to get around the public properties. That might be a place where we want to propose the line through those properties. We might want to consider, is there a way straight and have that might grow in the future. So just so you know, those things are on the table, as you start to look at maps, how we can connect the maps.
Elizabeth?
So that seems, how involved is the transit committee or your group of saying this becomes wonderful? How involved are they when new builders want to come and put up buildings? I mean, in the SPRC committees, I don't often hear about it, but I mean, I'll read an Arl now and they'll say, they've agreed to improve the streets right in front of their building, but you guys say to them, you can build a bike trail and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
At what point are you involved with building?
Yeah.
Go for it, Allison. You got it. You got the floor.
So we have a lot of situations. We are pushing out because of. Yeah.
And then one more thing that we're not talking about tonight, because we cannot talk about everything or else we would have you until midnight. We're planning on kind of carving out a section of policy and conversation within this plan about how transportation and development relate to each other. So kind of like a high level hit list of expectations, just so it's kind of more of a one-stop shop rather than having to sift and filter through the way you do in the current plan. So we recognize how important development is to our transportation network and vice versa.
Just 2 quick process questions. One is, we'll see the maps tonight. And then we'll react on the spot. How long is the process that we're gonna?
You have homework.
Okay. That's important. Just want to make sure that this is an ongoing process.
This is an ongoing process, and I joked with anybody who's part of our project team internally is that this is groundwork. We have an iterative process till engagement launch, but that's just engagement launch. Just like the vision and goals, you saw them change significantly after community feedback. We're going to do our best to get what we think is a solid recommendation out for policies and the network. But we know they're going to change because we're going to have hundreds of people come and tell us about transportation in the county and what we should be doing. And those are going to change. So what I would say is, like, we have a process that we'll walk you through after the map stuff, for you to go back to your committees and commissions and think about and talk about, because Today is really just you getting a little bit comfortable and asking us questions. We may see something you do and be like, oh, that's a really great idea. We'll take that. But this is not a feedback portion. These maps, we don't particularly want your feedback in your lines, though we know that happens and it's going to happen and we accept that it will. But this exercise is not you telling us what you want. It's you taking a look at the maps and saying like, oh, how did you make this decision and why? Instead of like giving us feedback, it's your opportunity to kind of like start to pull on some strings and think about why we did what we did, as opposed to giving us feedback on what you want to see.
But we will be there.
We do want
Yes,
your feedback.
We will. It's just don't feel like you have to give it tonight because that's not what we're expecting.
We don't just want your feedback.
Yeah.
So
And the second one's another process implementation one, which we probably can't speak to tonight, but we talked that we're gonna create this network. But are we gonna just create this network on paper, or is there gonna be CIP funding available to actually create this network? Or is this gonna be, well, we're waiting for that property to develop because somebody else is gonna pay?
So one of our intentions with this plan is to, out of it, have a recommendation for like a top X number of corridors that we need to dip into corridor studies for. So some of those will be bigger corridors and some of them may be smaller. There will also be strategies within this plan that we recommend about not just the policies that work towards these. So we can't give you the answer of what that's going to look like yet because it's not written. We haven't created it. But our intention is that this becomes a plan that is our guidebook, that we know what we're doing because we've articulated it here and we have a recent consensus document that has deconflicted recommendations, made it hard. Nate's going to follow up on me in a second. So that we have that map, so to say, that guiding direction of what we say is necessary to achieve the vision and goals that we have agreed to as a community.
We took recommendations from MTP elements and other countywide adopted plans and translated them into discrete CIP projects. So the process that we went through with Southbridge Basin was, here's all the things that the county board has told us to do with our right of way. What does that look like in practice on this specific corridor? And that exercise, I think, is really instructive for what Chris is talking about here, which is, this is our guidebook. These are the corridors we'll be doing first, and then each of those studies is going to make those decisions in a way that shows you a 10% concept at the end of that process.
Yeah, though I would say it didn't reflect a lot of what's in the MTP bike element. So we can, but we,
Right. Which
I'd like to
I
be
think-
better followed
I
on
think
that.
goes back to what Kristen's saying about making lots of promises at the MTP level
Okay.
that aren't necessarily possible in the available. Right?
Any other questions from the advisory working group? Bill?
This is an Arlington plan.
Yes.
Arlington's a little teeny place in comparison to Metro. How do we integrate Arlington into the holistic whole and have some effect on the holistic whole, which is not also all perfect?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I go back to what we're looking at for these networks, we are thinking about what's happening regionally too. So Metro has their Better Bus Visionary Network. It's something that we're thinking about when we're prioritizing transit on these corridors. Where is our largest regional partner transit service? Thinking about enhancing service. We're looking at the NVTA and NVTC enhanced transit corridors. That's where the region has come together and said, hey, this is where we need to do better. And we're thinking about that in Arlington so that we are coordinating our recommendations with the regional network. And then the same thing for the bike network. We are looking at what Fairfax, what Falls Church, DC to an extent, but like there's only like 4 places you can cross the river, 7. What they're doing and where they are planning bike investments so that ours match, so that we have a network that's complete. From a network perspective, that's what we can do. There'll be policies about coordination and things along those lines. But what we're talking about today, when we talk about the networks, is about making sure where we think we want to invest in bike is done well. And maybe we have to push our neighboring jurisdictions, or maybe we respond and say, hey, they want to do this. Let's take the win and plan that too. And then for transit, especially, it's making sure that our corridors serve the regional transit network.
Nice and loud.
Maybe introduce yourself.
Say I'm in Arlington. Just wanted to ask, if there's a precedent for this approach and a successful one. Just, it's unique and like to understand where it's been used before and done successfully.
I will point to your neighbor across the river. Move DC did not do what we're doing and deconflict their priority recommendations. But what they did was they created priority modal networks that were not modes like treatment specific. And they've been building it out. One of the challenging points they have is sometimes they didn't think about what they could do with their right of way. And they've had to go back and retroactively create a hierarchy that isn't always a publicly driven process. So what we're trying to do is do that hierarchy now. So it is a public process. So there is a conversation about it. So that we move forward. Denver has something kind of similar to where they've taken a step back from specific facility recommendations and talk a lot more about like what they need to prioritize in their network and where and why. There are very few plans that we have been looking at. San Jose did something similar. There are very few plans that have come out in the last couple of years that are still heavily facility-based plans, just because every jurisdiction is running into what we're doing. And it's like, oh, we made specific recommendations and everybody's bigger than us, right? Bigger cities are doing it too. They're like, we can't do this because we made plans at 10,000 feet and we're getting down to, the 110-foot level and saying, oh, we can't move buildings. But we've said we were going to do explicitly X. And once you say that, then people are wed to that. So in staying like explicitly X, we're going to do our best to do right and do what we can. And then there's a better ability to collaborate about, well, what is the thing that is right? What looks right in this corridor at the time with the context at hand? On time? 2 minutes early. Y'all are signed your seats already. We tried to make sure that we had kind of some diversity of voices and thoughts and perspectives at the table. We are going to bring the maps out in just a second. But at your tables, you're going to have a facilitator. Your facilitator is the staff member of the project team. So Allison, Brian, and myself when I sit down. And then we're going to have note takers. So Serena is our note taker here, Nick and David. Chris, Nate, and Aaron will be floating around. And then for our one public member, we thought there were going to be more people here, we'll be honest. We do have he's a +1, he can look too. We do have maps for you to look at in the back. They're just not a facilitated conversation like they are at the advisory groups. So with that, as we start to look at these maps, think about if there's anything we should be thinking about, high level feedback. Again, we're going to be asking you these things, or do you have questions about how we untangled? Let's have a conversation. They're all probably going to be slightly different at every single table. Just remember, I'm going to say it like 18 times today. We know there's gaps. We know there's gaps. We've taken things off. It's going to look different. But we want to have a conversation about how we make it work for the networks. So with that, thank you guys. No, I don't, but I will. No, so we have 3 maps. We have a transit priority map where we have showing you the second, because pedestrians are always first, but the second, and where we've second priority or third priority transit. We have another map that's the same thing, but it's for bike and micromobility, where there's second priority bike and third priority bike. There's a third priority, it means the other mode is the priority there. And then we have a map that it's not perfect yet, but it was the best way we could try and show you that totality of like transit priority, no bike priority, nor transit priority, bike priority, then transit priority, then bike. That's why you have facilitators at your table. So with that, we have till, and I'm gonna time check us just so that we leave enough for everything at the end, because we do have homework. We have some next steps we want to talk to you about. We have 40 minutes until our report out. Oh, last thing, in your group of advisor group members, choose someone who's responsible for sharing your feedback with everyone else, because we don't want it to be staff. We'll take notes for you, but we don't want to report out for you. So we've got 40 minutes. So we're going until 8:30.
So
the first thing I was really saying, like, I know that these maps are hard to kind of just look at separately. So if you want to look at transit, if you want to look at bike, or if you want to look at transit maps, or if I combine map and then like back and forth to see. But on this map, the numbers, purple line are priorities on priorities here. Lighter purple lines are priorities three.
They're all BC.
How you like food, the owners will be having to see as far as they want it. And one of the questions that is right now, Facebook's very long. That running jobs that make sense. There's places that running jobs. That's why it's just bad that people something one for one comparison. Then when we go to the next item, there will be paid. Let me know. So what we did is we basically the 5 inputs. So current MTP are just going to do a plan where they have some recommends like it's the better bus visionary network where they most of the better bus executives by but then it is also the NVP Vision Rep 7 by connection with the Virginia Transit Authority created basically where they take all high frequency accounts it is homework and priorities do no, none of these are right away. So priorities means in the hierarchy, the first priority is for bikes, head, the second priority is what we say, and third priority is what we say. When we apply that in a report of study, it's right, it's okay, how do we make the best way they can come for super slow to but sidewalks are great, it's very conservative, so like police we look at interviews from BRT were to come to south. No, they're not. They're barely wide enough in that and no buffer from the driving lanes. Hasn't in the sidewalks. So we redo study density and we border study and we both way allocations. We need one. Which is why you want. I will go with those sections for so that's as much as stress. So I would say that the transit map, unless you're like really a transit long in nerds, it's gonna look pretty collective like what's for you.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can get into some answers of whether or not you think something is if you open it up in your perspectives. It's not, we'll try really hard to follow that. There's more followers, more recommendations. It's like, wow, that is alternative parts that you're bringing priorities to, because we know how important that is for this one. For rail underneath, and honestly, we have enough space. So if we, someone with a true
through infrastructure management. We can make it. And the reason it doesn't today is because of our. Owning is retention. Before you find it. Definitely not.
I think that's kind of like.
You're right.
Like that's not. What pass through more. And then you can just fight if you want to.
There's these things. You're on those amazing things. There will be these interactions.
Yeah.
We get there. That's gonna be easier. So dark green pants on, just bike suit, right? It's just a transit. It's only dark green, lights are. It's bike is been to the green. And dark purple with light green. Yes. Transit is like. That's my not favorite. So far. I would write it. I think so one. Yeah, I'm not gonna be at the, we're still not planning trails. So the plan trail network, but we don't.
We'll even talk. That's how we get.
Oh, we will get there.
Okay.
This map is just on it.
Yes.
The contract like this is my priority first and transit second.
Build the building,
That would, yes, been right, yes. And that's another quarter of our thing.
So that's what we're asking you tonight. So, if they're on that.
Great.
That's.
And I thought. It's got the things we really want to talk about is this. Another 20 years from now, where we need to continue to make investment and it informs our. So as we move to develop our revenue,
Yeah, and that's why you already.
yes.
Yeah.
And that's where we got
So you'll be able to.
have the bicycle barns, so there's still some more houses that we need to figure out. Yep.
Right. Are you asking?
For this, but
Yes.
representative.
Right.
So.
Come in, it's not that. So we are, where's the fit there?
100%, that's
because you have something that we're not. It's not necessarily. I know when they did like. They identified.
So I mean, I'm saying like within no one, and that's, so that's really what Brian's city that he was talking about, is that like, we want everybody within like. So it's not really dependent, like, as much as it is, that's the issue. Yeah, that was gonna say. That's
there's an easy way to get there, it doesn't have anything.
That's exactly what the Bible is for.
Yeah. Right now. It just went to both sides. You can get anything you want.
That's the exact, that is what Mesh, that's what Mesh does. So just basically saying that if it's given something, there is going to be another way.
Where you can, how you know when you find. So
And so, you're talking about that idea of all the rules for now, and it's like some partners, not only if part of the reason most kids about moving. So, I get to.
What would be the line?
Big stuff, so.
There is no. Okay.
George Mason statue.
Right.
Stops and turns.
So like,
What we asked people is, I was not available.
I guess in terms of the key interpretation of it, the incidents, there may be some trend that I'm isn't the same way the laws don't. To me, it's the specific design for each of the analysis, it's 3.6 fundamental. But even if there's some wrong thing, there's all for concern. It's the third time fully applied.
About dark means that we want to have.
It's.
What we're communicating through that is
That's the third priority. We
want to be higher budget. Certain priority, not just saying, right, so you design being a right of way, if there's not being gravity on it. Questions in one space, there isn't reflective all ignorance on it. So we're not looking for space for, can we do by? It's in me, so it's. This is but it is.
We have to make.
Or probably heights, so you like, salaries, completely, so it's, that's the thing that's represented.
Right. Right, because the one, the priority one is already applied. And then. Outside, so the purchases that are separated out.
It's because dollars and can't do both.
Right.
Maybe it's not. Darn it.
Right.
But this was a fee complete. So I'll speak to a couple of different states, I'll just call them out. That's not, you guys are saying, I think it's like, you've seen them all. But you will see, and from all the biases and right now, interested like this. So listen about this conversation and try.
You say.
Running sidewalks someday. Can't do anything without possible like so. Now I'm having some of these and feel like state people were just going to That's one we had a conversation. If you look at one, if you look at one, it's a what? It's a but then we can do that. But if I think about the just being, you know, you think about the fact that that road is not single tier, so it's trending in a direction and I don't have space.
Just on this photos.
And we didn't even say to us, but it's just, it's there, but like.
There's no buffer between the sidewalk.
And I think of the presumption that there's.
You gotta walk down and just have it.
Really have. It seems to, watching South Bike, it's raised.
Very.
Yeah.
I think that was.
And that was-
Yes.
It's the same idea.
Only
That's
time.
An area. I was thinking, say there's from, say there's 10th Street, this street, corridor city. And this would be then priority.
So we said.
Bike, pedestrian, so bike would bus workers. So in terms of like free,
So what you have on this map is
construction
by the soul on that
is
station.
street.
One is that.
Would you do the bike line on its own?
No, so.
It's all.
It's an alternative analysis, like.
Well.
What can we do? What different type of, with an alternative analysis, develop like 5 or 6, 7 there are options. And you have data lots of stuff that are data that are not because apparently that's not possible. Right. So like actually with like that. We would be looking at the lens we would be seeing as those construction areas, don't get so there it is. Third question, we asked is, are pedestrians comfortable with this? And this comes right in a second, not buffer. If we're able to do that, great. Okay. What do we need based on the volumes and we have our guidance about how we design facilities based on other spots. Okay, what does that mean? What do we think needs to look like on the street? And then we look at what if we layer that in. What's still in play? Okay, is there something we can do for transit? And some of these transit priorities may not actually need to be in space. It's also telling us about where we need to think about intersection design, where we think about bus enhancing bus stops.
It's just confused with the bus drivers. And transit is.
Think about it as like an outlet.
Yeah.
We currently right, that's part of that. Yeah, so like you're down in space and you're like.
Got it down.
All things. On this 10th Street, maybe across the road, projects, all of the. Three of them are across the road. With the transit, the lights on first.
That's what the second priorities is like. If there's legal room, let's see if there's something.
Has always been.
Right, or experience of this, looked at different facilities.
So now.
Then talk to transit about how that would work for transit specifically, and learn that there was a stronger preference on off-street parking than we wanted the bike lanes on these because of how the transit routes on that corridor. Some buses came out and probably played this turn, some buses went through. All the buses needed to be part of the analysis. Can we make that turn? A one-way trail versus two-way trail. That's where the rubber hits the road in those former studies. And like, I think having been through that from I see city priorities here, it wouldn't be that possible, but that's not, because in the beginning of that. Holds one set of instructions, one set of instructions, one set of instructions. And then priorities of the access that it should be. We were interfacing with the federal government's plan for the MBTC.
Right.
Like, yeah, but none of those things took us the so the sort of radical thing is on the floor, right? Right. No one, none of those plans told us what to
Priorities, John, there's so many different pieces, and in a corridor study, we would look at and say, how do we make transit better? And it would be like, okay, well, we have. We're going to.
Well, this
put
is-
curb out and have something on intersection, so that the bus doesn't have to know in and knows out and in. And by prioritizing, like, putting on the map and saying, this is a priority, and someone says, this is the priority. Say, our curb priority here, bus priority here, and then those parking spots need to go. Prioritize those. Articulate the intersection needs to redesign for signal. And someone's talking about, well, the throughput of the delay for vehicles because they. Given them the green, they get it. Yes. That's been really.
But, you know, design.
It'd still be an alternative analysis, that's exactly what's happening within Route 7. But in the county, we would have maps to articulate what our priorities are. They want a transit, like to enhance transit along the corridor. We looked at Arlington County, this is critical, right? We can't do a transit on the corridor in the future. this would tell us where our push points are in such a what we need to advocate for with the region. Even NBT and Vision Route 7. Stakeholders like that is the road that they are planning to support, that we own and BTC operates. So it's a, this is helps us advocate internally, externally. It is a consensus document once it's adopted about what our priorities are and what we are going to do. It doesn't tell us exactly how we should leave, but it tells us what we're going to do. But when we say, yes, I'll make it. So we follow the like most started in the back of our buildings. We're doing the stakers doing here. It's gonna tell us, oh, that's fine. So that's what the public media. So that's what we're going at. That is transparency. So one of these things is it's not just a reflection of today, but it is our. So you want to keep that purple there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting your point about frequency or something. It's South Arlington and Arlington is but not fair. You know, like, I was trying to get. There's some guys on here. Yes, so anything is green, it's like.
Latest as well, if we're looking at like spring for. We just finished the next level of our area plan. And the priorities of these policies right now is awesome.
There's so much out there. It's a parallel corridor.
There's a benefit for this plan.
We prioritize bikes.
It's mine.
That's fine. This is been a reflection of today. This is a reflection of the network we want to reduce stress.
They promised to sacrifice. We're upset about it.
Because it's not finished. Want to see people so that.
But that's something that you can focus on yourself.
This is not a dead.
The connectivity thing is good. That's just a matter of part of downstairs.
Yeah, see. That's something here. You're a little soft, you know.
Yeah. From like the bike element, that's like.
Good.
We also. Reflected everything that you're possible. We didn't, unless it,
This is our,
the only time something was,
we got through.
for lack of a better term, was when there was a conflict that we recognized. Historically, Washington, I think we did our uncut spring. Where we told them like.
We need to take time.
Right. So we got in order to. That's been comfortable, otherwise transit or just.
Because if you look at Arlington Drive, Bridge, State.
And someone's looking for it.
We thought like, you know. It's something we order because transit is route, we're not gonna like create transit routes.
I know. The other thing, which I know I still do the, intersection are.
But when we do the gap analysis, these are gonna be things.
But the intersection. And here, we got.
Yes. Because the network perspective. This is like, this actually is a reflection of the priority time. It's reflective of the corridor. So there's a dark. Street lighting.
But yeah.
Yeah, this is actually central. So bikes are actually a little bit more important and transit isn't as important because the connections are all different, it's more in the video. So there's physical no connections, so kind of one, it's not the height especially that we have to these will be, and then you just go up to base. So that's why it's nice, secondary, you know, the boulevard chance, you think there's time for something that might catch on that. And that's why it's on here, is because we want to be able to use the keyboard. But when you plan and your quarter studies, it's really about making sure that it's minus 29.
Yeah.
Oh, the old way. Oh, yeah, meeting yourself now.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was closed, it was here. And say, okay, it's for meeting
Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah, the memorial trail is on.
Yeah, and I think this is, I think that was part of it.
Yeah.
I see how it's like. Because it's just. So, yeah. It looks nice, and that's put it out. Yeah. Here and it's, there's nothing on it close, but, you know, if you design it. Right.
Yes.
Right.
That gap, you're like, what's going on here?
When I tell you those.
And then we're on production.
Yeah.
Now, you're kind of. Now I think that we need to follow up.
No, I've.
Now, so we're good. No, I don't get it. My mental health is not making sense. Yeah.
Well, I was picturing someone out there, you know, writing on Michael, different directions, but so I don't know else. Like speaking up to our plan, like if I got thinking, yeah, just thinking. From my place, so I understand we have. Yeah.
That's a lot of our programs, like the senior services, getting like comfort baths out there. My browse, my office, it's not all I want people to have a well-defined, so they know what they want to do, and that's sort of what my plan needs to be. So like with design, eventually designing officers, but with design, it becomes intuitive where you're supposed to be making. I mean,
Right, that's my plus, right? It's like,
I really want to pay attention to those.
That is implementation of regulation.
Right, of course, yeah, that's just my direction. Well, it's all great, it has to be clear, like you're saying, what sign, it's sign, that's.
Absolutely, if we get back,
Right.
you're like, make it comfortable, you're sure that's your first time. And you're here and people learning, like you're not trying to get signed up.
Right.
Essentially share. What we're trying to do is really remember
You've done some,
the networks, policies, and strategies, so they all work together, but we can't do it those with in one conversation. That's good for all.
that's continuation. There's actually a paper street. Very much apart.
Change the skills officer to make sense. It's much more sense.
One of those where they say, it's been for yeah, it's up and down.
Yeah.
Somebody could.
So much makes sense in that. Challenges to
Start speaking here, I can understand.
the one with the teaching and
Mark, great.
Dr. Dog Hospital.
Like, you know, if there's trails, like, if this trail was kind of like, is it set up the bike? I mean, it can work, but it's not, if you really want people to
It's the
use it.
north-south
yeah,
border.
that's
So if you see George Meeson, it's over, it's continuity, so these are top border, and then, yeah, these are much more like. My priority doesn't mean It's not running. It also, like, you still see being buffer. It still needs to be known it's important. Like, on a national, it just means.
Information about people.
When you were thinking about
different classifications of segment. So it's like.
We really should think.
We have 40% of the population that
So we'll
considers.
recognize.
That's the way it's like.
Now, are you making?
Because that's where you see also these
Almost 10.
when
They were people. Particularly middle school. I used to-
that's where it's one like the trails.
Yeah, that's exactly why those meetings
You've got them in there, but it's a matter of how you, how does that? How would a student?
Well.
Unsafe.
That's exactly what the national reason is there's creates enough redundancy in the national. Then we don't, we're not gonna map.
Oh, wait, no.
Right, I'm not gonna map it for every single house, down every single street, but we can do, is we can go like 2 streets out from lines. For the middle school, and say like,
So from my perspective.
okay, great, we've gotten to the low density neighborhoods, let's not worry so much anymore because sure, they're gonna.
Focusing on the trip where it's a little bad in the car, it's too hard to walk.
It has engagement with like. I was like.
Bike parking isn't part of that conversation. It's something in policy. Yeah, we think about. Yes. It's such a major.
Tomorrow. This is important. So, and this is, remember, this will be recorded, so you can support, let's be for and then you'll get the slides. You'll get these PDFs, and then we're gonna actually ask you start helping the gap analysis.
Because people live in. There's like the numbers.
It has to be perfect, because we're doing it in text too. It's all just like everyone's gonna learn time. It's all, everything you share will be on there, but everything you share.
Great, that was also my.
And
it's the same way.
so, I mean, I'm gonna share all of it, because I personally think it's easier. We did this map to understand where we were doing things, but I think to understand the modal networks that are out there.
So, we don't want to talk to you.
And we've already ourselves like made notes of like, when we were deconflicting in there, we were like, okay, we're doing gap analysis. Like we were so tense, we're just. We're like, it's not a process. We're just representing the deconflicted networks. That's what we're currently planned. So it means like deconflicting, I think leads the easiest example to talk about. It was on the transit map. Because we were interested in doing the plan. I mean, we looked at. Right, because we didn't have to just. So we looked at that on conversation skills. We're not getting on to each site facility only. Realistically, what we're doing.
And actually, it's another case where.
And then other places where
Really nice.
like it's second, that I am still, but think about my son. The transit.
So that's.
On this board.
But like here.
Or the-
It's.
We're not.
We don't need that.
And that's what I was trying to do today.
For example, people here.
Even though.
Well, it doesn't indicate that this is a.
This is the chance.
It's probably the second, it's the second. Think about. Because that's.
So Jackson's the way.
So the network.
Right, so, yeah, this is kind of restricted, but like, so all of people use swim maps. So this is, it is like the way to happen.
Oh, that cross.
No, it's actually what I do at the time.
This network is.
I know, I'm just saying. This is so.
With my.
Yes, but this has got things, sorry, like this is not, that's what I mean, so it's like, well, on the other map. Yeah. Right.
Big star for
Right,
now,
right.
because these maps don't make sense for the first one. For a lot of people, like, oh, don't compare. I'm gonna compare about the combined maps. Until they make, there's something to see bigger map, and then the combined map is like, there's checkpoint, it's like, oh.
Right.
Like, it's not here, that's why. We are not spending that dedicated by this one.
If you go to well, they take the money, so that's remind everyone.
Yeah, they're a lot. Like, unfortunately, this. Work life you got on the mountains and finding bad you go down about is it legible. What I will say is it's a little bit clearer on a computer, which is how everybody will be doing it, especially if you zoom in and zoom out. So you can change the color saturation. The colors will be better than as your or adds much better. Yeah. Not for you guys, unfortunately.
But you can see we have. There's the stairs that we started.
October 27th. Okay.
Getting from here, which is World Network, and here. This is.
Same field, road show, the last view.
Yeah, that was really.
This is the wide side, gonna be a wide
I
side.
see signs all over the place. So
And then
yeah,
here.
I'll read it very effectively.
It takes my mom.
Not as big as you do.
Yeah, I think metro, the other ways.
I mean, I think part of this, I think you're like. Yeah.
I'm just not throwing up.
Well, and I like it in the sense that it's like being. I mean, looked at it, two projects. Would mostly go back to which one is prioritized higher.
But it is on the street.
Well, right, and like, you would use the combined score.
Yeah.
Basically, right. And so, but yeah, so that's.
This.
I don't work there either. Right, I use this. But this makes it very clear.
Here. And then you.
I'll just want to clean the two. Like you're.
Yeah, there's Burlington Road.
That's how it's that.
So I'll like here, and then you go.
So like classic,
There's space, but not.
because they're one of the.
Yeah, the other way you.
Right.
What your So one of, I think it was one of the first a year ago, was the
This is gonna be.
extension of this plan. So that we can-
It's like a, well, it's a.
so that like, we have clear direction, so we don't have to read it.
That's true, this whole corridor is.
Well, I really want to walk here, I really want to be right here, like, the right here, yeah, I have the facility design.
Here.
I'm not telling you, you can't recommend you, yes, so that is so Arlington. And you just won't have the facility that would encourage you to respond and influence the system.
Well, you know, the neighbors raised hell.
You know who the neighbor is? The former fire marshal guy in charge of interfacing fire with the.
Oh, really? Okay, it's what it's.
It's the street. You know, like, this,
Yeah, it's when it's close, it's true.
Yeah.
Because that's, we can get you.
Great example. This corridor actually, or the segment actually.
So no, that's not what this is. I know it's not. That'll be something that we do earlier and like. Because it's a plan. And this plan is being like the future, not a what is completely. It's still. Understand.
That's a great example.
There's a really
Your suffering
It's on.
But if we could do like that, we could trigger. Here, and then from here to here, that gives you also a record. Say,
We can't, transit, because one of the things that is important for transit to be moving is actually having those center.
Yes.
We don't have that, one turning here.
oh, really?
So as much as sometimes it feels like it's just this, like they create their safety. People don't do that.
Yeah.
I don't like.
Yes.
But it's. Any last questions before I go put on my facility, my like big group facilitator? So honestly, thank you. We're gonna go over some stuff. Feel free to ask me clarifying questions.
That's right. Right now.
I will get those emails. This is going to one which you know, space.
Better be ready.
But I mean, oh, who wants to report?
I can do
I still think you guys are good with that.
Yeah.
I'm going to awkwardly start inserting myself into conversations. I do love the fact that I'm cutting off conversations because it means that they're happening. Do you want to facilitate this or do you want me to? You're like, I'm done. Do we have a table that is eager to share kind of Tony, can I call on you from my table as tribute? Thank you.
Okay. Nice a lot. Whatever number table we were, you know, in principle, we really like the maps. We love that. It just kind of puts it all out there. It's a sort of a snapshot, an aspirational snapshot of what we want to be, and also a consideration of what's here now. It shows a lot of gaps that are still here in the moment, a lot of these weird little 2-3 block, bike lanes that were built and
Or planned.
we don't know where they were going exactly, but it's cool to see that, so you can just kind of acknowledge that. I think with our table had trouble with the visual presentation of it, particularly the combined, a lot of different colors that are very similar to each other, that made it kind of hard for us to understand, me in particular. And we think the gap analysis, I think, or at least I think personally, the gap analysis has been provided a lot of so a lot of insight into where we can build next. Is anything else that I missed from our rigorous discussion? Yeah, I think that's all.
Thank you. Any first who wants to go? I see typing still.
I didn't go. Google did it here. So we had started a lot talking about buses and whether bus frequency is going to be reflected by bus prioritization, and they were both talking about if they're prioritized, you're more likely to get frequent, and then maybe based on some planning. we talked about making sure that the bus network is considering connectivity to Metro. And then also, sort of senior citizen nodes, and the senior centers are not shown on your map, nor are senior housing. And that those are critical for bus infrastructure, so that needs to be thought about. And then, sort of the last mile discussion, whatever we want to call it, both in terms of pedestrian access off of bus routes, and then also safe bike routes that maybe aren't identified as routes, but you've got a route with a school 3 blocks away. Is that a safe safe way to get there? Talk about bike parking, which is sort of outside the study. On the bike network map, suggestion that you guys overlay the comfort map, because hills matter a lot on bikes. And so showing a major bike corridor that's got a steep hill on it, like you put a bike corridor on Superman Hill, which I don't think you did. It's not gonna go over well for the community, so just doing that overlay. Oh yeah, I had a question about whether already bike facilities planned, if it's not shown as a priority, does that mean they're going away? I was thinking about Langston specifically, and the answer, no, which is good to hear. I think that was the most of that. I think that was most of it.
Okay. Final table.
All right. I'm just gonna kind of read through our general themes. One of them is how to communicate that on the maps, the pedestrian is always priority number one. I thought of something like potentially adding like head number 1 and transit 2 in the key, just so it's like always clear, but there are other ideas brought up too that should also be looked into. Another thing is like, how do we ensure higher level ideas that were repeatedly brought up during the earlier phases are prioritized, like things like north-south connectivity, just like overall. Another one is how to show areas of importance, like on this map, schools were marked, but we also want to think about things like hospitals, areas with high amounts of like business travel and employment. To kind of like almost like an importance index of sorts, just for where people need to go in the highest volumes. How to just maximize simplicity in general in the presentation, because we don't want to overwhelm people with too much information. Adjusting the lines and the colors on maps to also further that simplicity. One thing that we can discuss here is how there's benefits to both types of maps, and that with both the bike and transit priorities overlay, you can kind of see where we might have space for more things and spaces where there's only one line and trade-offs have to be made. And then the last thing brought up is like curb space usage and parking and how we communicate that.
Great. I love this. I love that like a lot of the flavors were similar. That actually is one of my favorite things when we have small group breakouts like this, where like hospitals were mentioned here and there. I love the pet overlay because I actually had a thought about that. I was like, how do we do this on this map? We hear you about the lines. We're going to work on it before these go public. I think you heard me say it. I think Nick was printing these about an hour and a half ago. Like we blessed them being like brought here 2 hours, like at 3 o'clock. So we know there's a lot of work to do, but we trusted that you guys were going to be able to work through some of that with us. A few other things I did here were a lot of things that we're going to consider in the gap analysis. And I like that it came out of each group, like those centers of importance, the comfort map, like all of those are things that in the back of our head, we were already talking about when we were deconflicting, but we knew that we wanted to show the deconflicted maps before we started layering on so that we could start with the base that we all understood. So thank you all. Really great talking points. We've been taking notes. We're going to internalize a lot of this. No, Chris, no.
Some work. I really hope as we move forward, we're thinking about some of the big barriers in Arlington, some of the areas where we're never going to be able to get like connectivity through, and therefore we need a route around it as, at least deviating as possible. I hope we're giving a little bit of thought to the fact that because we're starting from some of our existing facilities, some of those existing routes and facilities are there just in order to take advantage of the existing infrastructure that was on the ground, not because it was actually a good route. Barton Street as a north-south bike route definitely jumps to mind as possibly the hilliest way you could possibly try and move north-south through Lawrence.
Coming up in the
There's a traffic signal there, so if you're gonna cross 10th Street, maybe do it there.
Were you in our internal conversation? Did you talk to a staff member that came up with that comment?
And that we're really looking carefully, especially like network at those crossings of major roads, making sure that those are workable. And some of our what's most annoying jug handles where the bike route tries to do a little jog on the lead or something ridiculous. And those things. And I do think we may need to look at the bike routing from how far from the most direct route are we ending up with? And maybe like if it's 15% farther, longer than the most direct route, that's fine. But if it's 50% longer than the most direct route, we need to go back to the drawing board and look at what options.
We literally have a comment in one of the cells of the spreadsheet that we did that's like Barton's hilly. Maybe not. Okay. So we have actually 2 homework assignments for you today. You do not need to remember the totality of this because I will be emailing you hopefully before noon tomorrow. We'll see how my morning goes. With a little bit more detail, with a little bit reminder with these maps. But the first thing that we want to do with your committee and commission is to help us with this gap analysis. We had some really good conversations at these tables already talking about pieces that we need to be thinking about through the gap analysis. Get us your recommendations. Not everything's going to end up in that map that goes out to the public, but the best map that we create is the map that has as many thoughtful considerations going into it. We're going to do this with a large group within our DOT as well, and think about what makes sense, where we need those parallel connections for some of the facilities that we've been honest about not being able to achieve bike facilities on in the future. What are the opportunities for those parallel routes? What places do we need to be getting to? If there's a transit kind of like gap that you notice, share that with us. We want to know, these maps when they go out to the public on October 27th, which is the next slide. They're not going to be perfect, but we want them to be a lot better than what we brought to you tonight. And that is going to happen because you're going to help us do it. So I hope everybody's committee or commission meets by October 13th. We just need it by then because 2 weeks later they're getting published and we want a little bit of time to get through it. If they're not formally meeting, if you're able to do some coordination over email, that's better. We just want as many brains on this as possible. And then we actually have a second piece of homework that we didn't talk about tonight, but we think it's pretty straightforward because we've talked about the vision and goals so much. Another thing that we're working on is policy. That's going to come out in the October where we're going to start talking about it. What we would love for your committee and commission to do for each goal, so the 6 that will remind you through a link of what those are, is what are 3 opportunities, things that you think about that can help us reach that goal that will maybe kind of pivot into thinking about policies or strategies. And then what are 3 challenges, 3 things that might make it hard to achieve that goal, and tell us so that we can think about how we craft policy to work through that. We don't need you to draft policy for us. There's going to be so much iteration that we don't want that baked policy. We want the topics because all of the topics we want to pull together into thoughts. If we get baked policy from tons of different groups, that's a lot harder to combine into themes about how we create policies that work towards our vision and goals. That is also going to be due on October 13th. So your due dates are the same. I will remind you in email. I will remind you weekly in email. About these that are coming. If you're not able to get 3 for each, that's okay. If one has 4 and one has 2, that's fine. We just don't want 27 from you because we need to be able to sort through. And really, we want the cream of the crop, the things that really rise to your top concerns about these policies and these goals, because that's where we need to make sure we're targeting our policy. So next steps, that homework, it's going to be a key piece of how we're developing these networks, how we're refining them. Or when we actually call them draft, because right now we're calling them gap analysis networks because they don't even deserve the term draft because we know they're not. They're not reflective of something we would be comfortable saying are draft priority networks because they're not there yet. But at our next meeting, mid-October, Right now, we're saying October 22nd is about what looks reasonable on our calendar with enough time to bring everything back to you. This isn't going to be a give us feedback meeting. This is going to be us previewing everything that we're going to be bringing to the community in October. You'll have already gotten us the feedback via email. We'll be able to talk about it a little bit and maybe reflect back on what we're sharing at that meeting. I'm going to preview your homework from that meeting. It's going to be your opportunity to share everything your committee and commission thinks about what we bring out as phase 3 engagement. So the homework that comes from October is more feedback on what we've done with the networks that you gave us input on the policies. The homework from October will be like actually commenting on that. We'll follow a very similar cadence as we did for the vision and goals. But mid-October, homework's due. I'll get an email out about it. Our meeting is tentatively October 22nd. Calendar invite will go out soon. That one will be virtual. This was nice. I do like the comfort of my own home. And then phase 3 engagement launches on October 27th. We are very excited about this. We have a lot of thought about how we intentionally share this with people so it's digestible. It's something that they can give us feedback on, that it's understandable. That process is going to look a lot different like the last 2 phases of engagement, where we've got an online feedback form of sorts, where we do pop-ups, where we do open houses, where we do canvassing to get the word out. So that form of engagement is going to look familiar. Exactly what our boards and our materials that we share with the public look like, we're not sure yet because we don't have everything pulled together, but we are very excited about October 27th. Like we have before with Erin's comms package, we'll share it with you guys to push to your committees and commissions. I've been talking too long today. With anybody else who you think might be interested, we want you to come to the pop-ups and the open houses again. Your guys' participation through this process has been great. It's helped push community engagement as well. So we want to say thank you for everything that's happened to date. I can't believe we are a year into this process too. I want to celebrate that for a second. Phase 3 engagement ends on December 7th. That's when the questionnaire or the feedback form closes. And we start looking at everything. We know how important what you will have gleaned with your committees and commissions are. So that December meeting that we will schedule will be early December so that we avoid the rigmarole of the end of the year and all of the holiday festivities that happen. That meeting, we won't be presenting at you. We might share a little bit of high level of like, this is how many people we talked to and this is who we heard from. That meeting is going to be you all sharing your committee and commission's feedback. So your homework assignments will be the topic of that meeting. What you guys think about, what we shared with the community, what your committees and commissions recommendations are, that meeting is dedicated to that conversation. We're going to take that information. We're going to take everything we heard from phase 3 engagement, and we are going to come up with a refined plan. That refined plan, refined pieces of the plan, modal priority networks, policies. We're hoping to bring that back to the advisory group in midwinter for you guys to give us more feedback or information about, are we getting closer to policies and networks that work towards our vision and goals? Your homework again will be to give us feedback on those. What are we missing? Hopefully not as verbose as the first round of feedback because the needle would have moved closer. We're going to meet again. We're going to hear that. And then we're going to come up with our proposed network, policies, guidance at all. And we'll talk about that. And then sometime in the spring, TBD, because I'm not committing to an exact month right now, we will release a draft plan for people to review. That plan will be out for a bit. All of the farther out pieces of exactly what engagement looks like, we haven't figured out yet because we're focused on phase 3. But there's going to be an opportunity for people to see the whole plan long before we bring it to the board for a request to advertise or adoption. So this is the high level cadence of the next 6 or 7 months. We will be emailing you probably from now on till October weekly. Don't block my email, please. But with that, does anybody have, because I think we have a few seconds before public comment, any questions about the upcoming cadence process homework assignments? Bill?
Could you put that in writing?
Oh, when all of it's going in an email, you do not need to remember Yes, 100%. I actually have an email drafted already. I've had, yeah, Elizabeth. So there won't be a true review period just based off of the cadence of when we need to get out to the public for you to see it before it goes. You'll see it at the advisory group and then it'll go public 4 or 5 days later. But you will have an opportunity with your committee and commission as part of phase 3 engagement homework to tell us if there's pieces that are missing from the gap analysis or if there's a piece wrong. Pam,
How do we get the map?
I'm going to send them to you. PDFs. Yeah, PDFs. I had some hands.
I was gonna ask the same question, but
Yeah.
is it gonna be 3 different maps?
Yes.
Today?
Yes.
So not layered like that would be cool.
No, unfortunately.
I just want to get clarity, is the gap analysis gonna be done before phase 3 goes public? Or
Yes.
after?
Before. That's what your homework is, and that's why it's due on the 13th, is so that we can see what you share with us and integrate it into a map that goes public, because this does not go public. It'll be on the advisory group page, but it's not for public engagement.
So we're gonna mark it now.
Basically, or tell us, please add something to this street, from the street, on this street. Whatever works for you, I will make work for us. I'm not going to tell you how to. I would say marking it up is going to be hard. What I would say is like, please add a please add bike priority on Z Street from Y Street to P Street. And if it's easier for you guys to collaborate on a map and share that with us if you can, but like really the tos and froms and on streets is the most clear way, because that can't be misinterpreted like a line on a map sometimes can be.
And I think somebody who like PDF is not gonna work for group or it's not the format that works. For me, and you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Erin.
Can I just take these?
Yeah. We're going to share them electronically and you can print them out if you really want to go to a FedEx and use a plotter. Anyway, we have our set aside ones ourselves. So yeah, I don't, sorry, I already said yes. Yeah. So that way paper's not wasted. I do want to time check. We have 2 more minutes before public comment, right?
Yes.
Your maps might be more useful if they did not stop abruptly at the county border.
That's fair. Yeah,
I believe that's a really.
That's very.
it's a good comment too. Any kind of final questions, clarifications? I will be sending an email. There will be a lot of attachments. There will be a lot of links. I will send them again. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. To Erin's point, if you think you need, like, we're not going to have an interactive map, I'll just say that much. But if you need something that helps make this easier for you, don't hesitate to reach out. And we will make what you share with us workable on our end. You may just get some clarifying questions from me to be like, what did you mean here? But thank you all so much. This meeting went very well. It exceeded our expectations. Okay. I'm happy to have that a double win. I hope everyone gets home safely tonight. You will be hearing more from us. I do just want to quickly acknowledge Joan because tonight is her last meeting with us as an advisory group member. Thank you for spending the last year with us, and we know we will take care of your successor. I said you're the predecessor, the successor. And let us know if you need to get her. You just get to now own your own comments, right? They don't have to be tempered by a group's. So thank you all again and have a lovely evening.